The Amazing Spider-Man. Over the decades of this character's existence, there has been an endless supply of stories, some loved by fans, some hated, many adapted into different forms of media such as shows and games. If you're familiar with both the world of comics and the other mediums of Marvel, you'll often find that a good portion of the inspiration for Spider Man storytelling comes from that original 1960s era. The sheer amount of introductions and foundations built in this legendary run is insane, largely why it's one of the most immortalized. But even within this era, there are certain issues that rise above the rest, as they manage to encompass every facet of the Spider Man character and methods of storytelling associated with him. In this video, we're going to take a look at one of the most important foundational and thematically significant comic books in all of Spider Man's history, and investigate exactly why its significance will never fade. I'm Playmaster Plus, and welcome to the web of lore and destiny. The earliest parts of the Spider Man timeline, at least for me, have always carried a unique kind of magic. They exist so far before I was even a concept upon this planet, and yet they directly affect the large sum of the fictional media that means so much to me. So, which comic book in particular am I singling out today? None other than the first Amazing Spider Man annual, released way back in 1964. Marvel likes landmarks and anniversary specials, and a way they have shown that throughout the years is through the oversized annual issues that would come out once a year for many of their popular series. At this point, Spider Man had existed since 1962 and had received its own series in 1963, making this his first year of truly being a character. At this point in time, much of the magazines have been focused on introducing new villains and players to the Spider Man roster, and in a way, this issue serves as a collection of the best supervillains that have made enemies of Spider Man thus far. I'm sure you've heard of the group known as the Sinister Six. They are a famous band of villains that have taken up many different shapes and forms, but they are extremely common to encounter in popular Spider Man media. Some of the more famous representations include the 90s Spider Man cartoon adaptation called The Insidious Six, the spectacular cartoon Sinister Six, and their prominence in the Insomniac game. For a while, it seemed like Sony was obsessed with assembling a cinematic version as well, although we haven't had a proper representation of them on the big screen. Already, we see the setup for a legendary issue, as the villain group here is arguably one of the most famous factions directly tied to the Spider Man mythos, even in current day. Pair this with the fact that, at the time, this was the largest assembly of characters in a single Spider Man issue. We can clearly see that it was intended to generate lasting hype. In this time period, Marvel is very proud of its action sequences and fantastical superhuman battles, but the response to the Spider Man series so far had proved that their audience was also hungry for human drama, and Peter Parker's life has always encompassed the narrative craving for emotional and psychological depth. What gives this issue a further leg up compared to others is that it specifically makes sure to include this crucial element as well. From a storyline perspective, the order of events is well constructed, from both the angle of successfully introducing new readers to the concept and holding the attention of the already established fans. It opens with the villainous threat of Otto Octavius using his mental link to his robotic arms to escape prison and begin assembling the Sinister Six, immediately setting the stage for impending peril and therefore generating intrigue for the reader. From there, we get a glimpse into the daily life of Peter Parker. His connections to the Daily Bugle, poor social life at school, and status as Spider Man are all made clear within the span of just a couple of pages. This may seem mundane or simply status quo for a Spidey comic, but setting this groundwork is an important thing to keep in mind, especially for an issue like this, as it is theoretically a great jumping on point for people new to the series. Not only is there a giant one on the issue due to it being the first annual, but it features an eye catching cast on the cover art and promises the appearance of other beloved Marvel characters. If a comic reader had not yet embarked on reading Spider Man, this would be a very compelling time for them to choose to do so. As such, it makes perfect sense to show a day in the life of Peter, as well as the inclusion of what comes next. In this issue, Peter's about to face one of his first true crisis of faith moments, one of my favorite tropes in the Spider Man saga, as evidenced by my prior videos. Technically, the third issue and the introduction of Dr. Octopus was the first time Peter truly considered quitting being a hero, but it was quickly resolved without too much visible consequence occurring in the story. Interestingly, the events that are soon to unfold in this issue are similar in a zoomed out sort of way, and the primary villain is once again Otto Octavius. In fact, I've noticed a thematic through line in the presence of Dr. Octopus and the potential end of Peter's status as a hero, a subject I might make a video on soon, so do be sure to subscribe if more Spider Man topics like that interest you. Upon witnessing Aunt May forlornly going through memorabilia surrounding Uncle Ben, Peter is racked by guilt as he relives his origin story established in Amazing Fantasy 15 and is crushed by his portion of responsibility for Ben's death. Again, this is perfect for new readers. A quick recap of Spider Man's origin story that fits intuitively to the new narrative unfolding currently. This also sets a tone that would go on to appear more frequently in the comics, that being Peter's mentally distraught headspace specifically tied to major tragedies that have occurred in his life. Up to this point, his origin and lingering guilt hadn't been explicitly brought up in either the captions or his thought bubbles. The Parker luck had been well established, as well as his often brooding attitude surrounding his monetary and romantic endeavors, but the articulated weight of his past pressing into him had been largely absent from most of the colorful adventures so far. Amidst his dreary contemplation, Peter startlingly loses his spider powers, seemingly out of nowhere. He at first assumes that he's lost his abilities altogether, which plunges him into a slump filled with philosophical thought surrounding the purpose of his own life, in light of Spider Man's newfound absence. It's interesting because Peter has often had fleeting wishes that he had never become Spider Man at all, due to the negative impacts the identity has had on his life. However, when an apparent reversal occurs, he doesn't feel as though he has necessarily been cured of anything. Intercut with this personal drama are scenes of the continued assembly and planning of the Sinister Six, organized by Otto Octavius. As previously stated, not only is the Sinister Six, at this point in time, the largest collection of supervillains Spider-Man has ever seen, but they are carefully comprised of his most powerful foes, who have garnered a bloodlust specifically for him, given the humiliation they've suffered at his hands. This time, there is no gambit for money or power. These villains have absolutely no other motivation besides killing Spider-Man. This actually displays a commonly used writing device within drama stories, forcing the protagonists against their greatest threat in their weakest state. Contrasting Spider-Man's decline of power with the growing danger of the Sinister Six steadily builds a far greater sense of dread within the reader than could otherwise be achieved. Burning the rope on both ends for the hero keeps the tension high and the consumer guessing, as a bleaker scenario equates to a more wonderment as to how the good guys can possibly win. A massively popular example of this would be Infinity War. In many ways, this movie came off the heels of Civil War in the timeline, meaning that the Avengers were split apart, with some being akin to outlaws, and relationships between the heroes were destroyed, directly before being pitted against Thanos. This aspect of the storyline seems to have directly inspired the second film starring Tobey Maguire, which is often hailed as one of the best Spidey films, another reason why this comic can be considered legendary. Just like the narrative of that movie, Peter soon discovers that his powers hadn't vanished, but rather had been blocked by his own mind. It was all psychosomatic. His depression and temporary loss of self-worth was putting a sort of block on his abilities, directly correlating his mental state with his physical prowess. Also, this is the first real instance of Otto devising an elaborate plan, setting the groundwork for his character to go on to be known as the Master Planner. Knowing that Spider-Man won't resist walking into their clutches if they have a hostage, the Sinister Six abduct Betty Brant, whom Spidey has publicly shown his protection over before, and in an unfortunate turn of events, Aunt May as well, who had gone to talk to Betty about Peter's recent odd behavior. Betty is Peter's girlfriend in this early era, which means that the two women he currently cares for most are in the clutches of his most powerful enemies. Knowing it's a trap and believing that he's without powers, Peter dons his Spider-Man costume to do whatever he can regardless. This moment proves that it isn't his supernatural abilities that grant Peter his selflessness or bravery. Peter Parker, as an ordinary human, is still willing to put his life on the line to save those that he cares for, and this very fact seems to ignite something inside of him, as he soon discovers in the upcoming altercation with Electro that his powers have returned. The focus on saving Betty and May overshadowed his severe guilt and shame, reinvigorating the dormant strength within him. This is when the pivot of triumph truly occurs, despite the fact that none of the fights have begun. Spider Man's confidence has come back in full swing, as he makes his trademark quips while deftly tackling each member of the Sinister Six. The dread and genuine suspense has dissipated, being replaced by the excitement to watch good prevail over evil. Normally, this feeling would be delayed until the action was closer to its finish, but I believe this comic intentionally does this tonal shift early in order to properly emphasize that the true conflict of this issue was person versus self. And now that Peter has regained dominion over his own mind, it's time to see him triumph over his enemies. Speaking of, it's time we shift the focus of this video as well. As much as I love talking about thematic elements and narrative structure to these stories, there's one other crucial element that some may consider to be the backbone of the superhero genre: the action. See, this issue doesn't neglect the fun of witnessing high octane fights between wielders of fantastical powers either. The Sinister Six agreed to take on Spidey one by one in a randomized but predetermined order, the idea being that each would have a chance to kill him, but no matter what, he would eventually grow weak enough that his fate would be sealed. What's more is that they each chose an environment best suited to their abilities, giving every advantage to themselves and every disadvantage to Spider Man. This gives a creative edge to each of the battles, as it forces Peter to be more clever in his approach to defeating them. One of the most notable examples is how he had to fight the Vulture without the usage of his web shooters. With every villain he defeats, Peter uncovers the next location, this deadly trail eventually leading to Betty and May if he survives. The final villain waiting for him is, of course, Dr. Octopus, who corners Spider Man into a fight underwater in a giant bowl, a rare instance of Otto truly living up to the Octopus name. In many ways, each villain of the Sinister Six lost because they were so obsessed with being the one to personally get revenge on Spider Man, rather than working together in a more sensible or carefully orchestrated unit. In my view, this highlights a crucial difference between our hero and his villains. Peter was able to overcome the flaws embedded into his mentality in order to ascend, while these villains were stuck in their flawed ways, which resulted in their downfall. The falling action is what you'd expect, with Betty and May being returned home safely and the Sinister Six brought into the hands of the law. Overly trusting Aunt May was of the mind that Otto was a gentleman doctor while she was in captivity, which in a strange sort of way ends up foreshadowing plot developments that come much farther down the line. Pete reunites with his girls, and we get a classic happy ending. Some other fun things about this issue is that it was intentionally stuffed with as many cameos from other Marvel characters as possible. It features appearances of Thor, Doctor Strange, the Fantastic Four, Ant-Man and the Wasp, Captain America, Iron Man, and the X-Men, making it feel very interconnected with the broader Marvel universe. Basically, what I'm trying to say in this video is that this is the quintessential Spider-Man comic book. When it comes to a singular magazine, not a story arc or a run, but a single issue comic, you don't get much more of a complete Spider-Man experience than this. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video, and if you have, make sure to leave a like and comment what one of your favorite Spider-Man issues is as well. If you like my methods of storytelling, it is always amazing if you want to check out my series of fiction novels on Amazon, or become a channel member of the Lore Totem tier to access them as audiobooks. Something you can do to help me out entirely for free is check out the podcast I co-host with my sister, or of course join my Discord server for news and discussion. Thank you to my current channel members, Night Rain, Casual T, Decadisha, and Lucybrin for being top investigators of Playmaster Plus. I hope you'll visit my web again soon, and until then, keep spinning yours.